If you have an 18-year-old daughter and you tell her you're going to talk at the TEDx, she can positively make you more nervous than getting before screen with Arnab Goswami. But I'm delighted to know that there's suddenly an interest in India to read about flying motor cars. But then I felt, when I saw the response to the presentation, that possibly there could have been some more enthusiasm. I remember some of us in the audience, a little older lot here, would remember Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Remember the movie? The possibilities are endless. They showed it to us 30 years ago or 40 years ago. It's coming to fruition somewhat. And I was mentioning there that, hey, this can't work unless it comes down like a helicopter. It has to drop down like a chopper. And the whole paradigm changes. And I think that's what is happening all across us today. The world is changing. The world is not happy with incremental thoughts. The world is looking at transformative ideas. The expectations that we in India have today, and rightly so, are for transformational change. We can't live, a society like India's cannot live on jugaad, chalta hai, but there's no option, life is like that. And this is a great opportunity where young India, enlightened young India sitting before me, is looking for that change. Look at what happens when you think transformatively. Look at what happens when you can think big. We had an election campaign some time back, and I've been harped to God's end that I can't be political, but it's not about being political. It's about the thought behind a largely successful campaign that I want to talk to you about. We had a campaign in a situation where the world believed India cannot have a government which can rule without a coalition. I remember 2.5 years ago when we first started discussing elections, the general discourse was India has to have a coalition. So let's start building up a coalition, let's start negotiating. And the whole narrative was find solutions within the coalition politics. But if you think big, if you think differently, and make up your mind that no, we can actually imagine a government which has a complete majority and can govern the country well, you start thinking of possibilities. Just like that motor car which now flies. You start thinking of the way forward. How are you going to get an absolute majority for a country like India? And then you work backwards. You design your entire story around the possibilities that are there in the system. It's only about opening your mind up to those possibilities. And then you use TED, you use technology, maybe a little bit of entertainment, you use design, new designs of campaigning or new designs to present your viewpoint. And believe me, everything is possible. It's in the mind. It's a decision all of us have to take in our individual lives. I don't know how many of you have come across a situation where you thought the world is coming to an end. This is it. There's no way forward. There's nothing one can do next. It's at that time when one will have to look at options, will have to think big, will have to think out of the box, change the frame of reference. Our difficulty is we look too much into a structured frame of reference. If only we could go beyond that frame. If only we could change the way of looking at things. Look at it differently. Look at it transformatively and look at it with scale. Don't go into the cliches that we've been hearing all our lives. Then I think you come across solutions which can have an impact. I've been bothered about this for many years. That is India going to be left at the current state of affairs, or can we actually look at a completely new India where we can guarantee power to every individual in this country for 24 hours? We in Mumbai are relatively quite privileged. We have the advantage of getting power regularly. We don't have DG sets, we don't have inverters. But I'm sure you are all aware that large parts of India still survive with a few hours of power supply. I mean, the per capita consumption of power is obviously absurdly low. It's about 1,000, 1,100 units per person in the country against a world average of 4,000. And when I tell people that in 5 years, India can produce enough electricity that everybody gets power round the clock, the general refrain is that, oh, it's not possible, it can't happen. But as I sit down to analyze it, I'm quite convinced that if we as a nation were to set the bar high, were to make up our mind we have to do it, and work backwards, there's no way it cannot happen. And I am convinced that given effective leadership, given vision, given a commitment, sincerity of purpose, India can imagine within the next 4.5 years a country which has 24/7 power through the length and breadth of India. Look at another thought that just came to my mind. We are always looking at solutions on a very incremental increase. So when we look at tourism, for instance, India traditionally has a 6-7% growth in tourism, and we have about 6.7 million tourists coming to India each year, foreign tourists. And that's against the French 84 million. Even the Chinese today get 57 million foreign tourists. Now, can India, instead of looking at a 6 to 7% growth in tourism, imagine that we'll grow 10x in the next 10 years? Can we as a nation start looking at a different scale of operation altogether? Now, just imagine India earns about $17 billion out of tourism. If we were to look at a 10x earning out of tourism, you're looking at 67 million tourists coming to India. And now look at the spin-off, what happens after that. A 10x increase in tourism would mean nearly $150, $170 billion of income, foreign exchange coming into the country. All of that is value add. People coming from outside your country and spending in your country. It creates the maximum number of jobs that any sector can create. It sorts out, obviously, your current account and fiscal account deficits. It improves your infrastructure. And a small idea like keeping India clean is something we all were very familiar with. It's something we would all do if we went to Singapore or London for our vacation. But back home in India, we wouldn't be bothered if there was a pile of garbage right outside our house. But it's the thought. If we were to start looking at things differently, if we could start seeing what does the tourist want when he comes to India. Obviously, he wants a clean India. He wants good electricity and water. He wants tourist spots to go to. He needs entertainment. He wants to be connected well, whether it's telecom, whether it's road and rail and air connectivity. So should we, in our country, start looking at things from an objective which is significantly bigger, change the frame of reference and say, no, we are going to look at a 10x increase in tourism and then work backward. I see no reason why we as a country cannot completely change the story, change the narrative to a new future, a future in which India prospers, and that's where all of us prosper. And in that lies the story about our involvement. What is the involvement that we, and I include myself in that, are willing to do for that change we want to see in our country? Are we willing to be that change? Are we willing to be that vehicle which will make that change happen? And I feel if all of us in this room only, we are about 1,000 people here, if all of us in this room decide that we are going to be that change to make Mumbai a better city, I see no reason we can't make it happen. The power in this room, the power to actually impact the life of Mumbai is incredible. But it's a question of taking it upon ourselves what we will do. And in that respect, If you look back, whether it was Mahatma Gandhi's movement to get independence into India 100 years ago, or even if you look further back, whether Abraham Lincoln, when he decided to end slavery in the United States, each one of them was willing to think big, think differently, challenge the concepts or the preconceived notions that society had. They were willing to make a difference to other people's lives and willing to sacrifice their own life in the bargain. And I think in that respect, the opportunity that India has today, the opportunity that all of us have today to make a difference to our country, to make a difference to the nation's future, to impact the lives of probably the less privileged neighbors that we all have, is humongous. And what can that change be? I remember a few years ago, I was addressing some chartered accountants, and in the course of the discussion, I just threw a question. I said, what if all the chartered accountants in India were to make up their mind that they will not bribe a tax official? We have about 80,000 chartered accountants in India. Let each one of us pledge we will not bribe a tax official. I see no reason we cannot stop the tax terrorism or the corruption that we all talk about day in and day out. It's a small thought, but think about it. We 1,000 of us sitting here, even if we were to decide that come heaven or hell, we are not going to be influenced or we are not going to look at a shortcut. Should there be a problem, we'll fight for it. We will get involved, do a root cause analysis possibly, find out where the systemic change is required, and then fight for it. I mean, in a manner of speaking, the Lokpal is an outcome of society. It is an outcome of the people's power to fight for change, to fight for improvement, to fight for a better tomorrow. And that fight against corruption is something which I think has got ingrained in the people today. I don't see it will be very easy for any politician for that matter, any bureaucrat, any person to be willing to get corrupted the way we have seen over the last few decades. Given the fear that society is watching, society is making you accountable, my personal request to each one of you, don't just look for somebody else to get a solution in our life. Let's start looking at those solutions. Let's start seeing what can be done, what we can do, where we can fight for our rights, fight for change, fight for a new India, which we can leave behind to the next generation. I remember if one was to look back in our lives, breaking a traffic signal, for example, is not something we take very seriously in our lives over here. But once when my driver jumped a signal and he was stopped a few yards away, he tried to flaunt the name, and my wife was sitting there, she was talking on the phone, and the cop made a very good comment. He said, "Did the minister ask you to break the signal?" He asked the driver in Hindi. And it was an eye-opener. I remember my wife coming absolutely fuming at my driver and almost wanted to sack him. But I think that's where the change will come from. That's where all of you will make us accountable and will make people the center point of the development of India going forward. Your lives are intrinsically dependent on what you and we together do to be the change that we want India to be. We all participate together as a team. I urge each one of you, give that small part of your life. Give us that little bit of your life. And together we can make an impactful change in society. We can actually look for a bright and golden era of India and bring India to its truly deserving place in the comity of nations. Thank you very much for your patience. It was very enjoyable talking and chatting up with all of you. Thank you.